Well, the COP summit is still underway and we have seen a lot of outcomes. UK was present there. The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was present, and we saw those visuals with the Indian Prime Minister as well. With me is the British High Commissioner to India to talk about UK's priorities when it comes to climate action and how to deal with this crisis. What was the key focus for the British Prime Minister at the COP summit in Dubai?
I think you're right to use the word crisis. The truth is that the increase in temperatures across the world is dangerously high, and the consequences of that are every day more evident, even in the extreme weather events which India is witnessing, including in Chennai, very sadly, over the last week. So it is a crisis. The UK's response is, of course, part of a global response. The UK is a leader. We have halved our emissions. At the same time, we've grown our economy since 1990. We are putting a lot more money into how we're going to address the crisis, not just in terms of how we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also how are we going to deal with the consequences of climate change, which you're already feeling in India and across the world. And that's why the Prime Minister Sunak came with some new money at the COP, exactly for that. Now, lots of countries are coming to the COP. Prime Minister Modi was there as well, because this is truly a shared global challenge, and we can only do it together.
The British Prime Minister said that the climate politics is at a breaking point. There was a pledge of $2 billion as well. If you can elaborate on that.
Sure. What he was saying was we have to bring people with us. Now, the UK's got a long way, halved our emissions almost. We have a legally binding target to reduce them to by 68% by 2030 and 77% by 2035. That's well on the way to net zero. Remarkable achievement. But we have to bring people with us. You can't just do it by top down. You've got to bring people along. And one of the interesting things I've seen in India is how Prime Minister Modi has made this not just about kind of investment and stuff, but also about lifestyle through the Life Initiative. And that's part of bringing a population with you to accept the changes which are necessary if we are really going to deal with climate change.
But the developing countries like India, have been saying that the West, the developed countries, have not fulfilled their commitments regarding the climate finance. Sure. What do you have to say about this criticism?
Well, I mean, the United Kingdom is putting a great deal of money into climate finance, and we're delighted that one of the things which has come out of this COP already in its first week was the agreement on a loss and damage fund to deal with some of the consequences of climate change, particularly in the developing countries. So we're putting a lot of money in. In fact, I think there were developed countries on track for the Copenhagen pledge of $100 billion per year of public money. But that's just the tip in the iceberg. The truth is that most of the capital is going to come from the private sector. And that's why you need to create initiatives and ideas where the public money can help the private money to come in. That's why we strongly supported India's proposals on changing, for example, the World Bank. So the World Bank is more focused on bringing in private capital. It's a great thing that came out of the G20. Why we have our own private finance arm of the British government, BII, as well as a development capital program, putting money into Indian enterprises and trying to attract private capital, because that is, in the end, is how you're going to solve this crisis.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see India's role when it comes to dealing with climate change? Now, we know that we have the International Solar Alliance, which has been has seen, in fact, enthusiastic response by many countries. And also in Dubai, we saw the Indian Prime Minister launching the green credit system, the initiative. What do you have to say on that?
I think it's going to be very important to create the market mechanisms which allow private companies to be able to trade green credits in a way which it encourages sustainability. That's what we have in the UK through our own carbon market. That's what happens in quite a lot of the developed world. Because in the end, it's going to be private enterprise initiative which are really going to help us to do this within frameworks which are set by government. Now, the big aim, of course, is to keep the rising global temperatures to 1.5 degrees on pre-industrial levels. That is a very ambitious aim. It's something we pushed for very hard in Glasgow in the COP a couple of years ago, which Prime Minister Modi announced some very big initiatives at. What is a big challenge for India, but also a huge opportunity, is I think India is going to be the first major economy that's going to seek to get up to developed country status. Prime Minister Modi has been really clear about that ambition, using increasingly green energy and not just powered by fossil fuels. And that's a big ask. You've got to grow a lot. That means in consuming more energy. There's no way India's not going to be consuming more energy, but where does that energy come from? So the big initiatives about how can we get more green hydrogen on stream, how can we get more renewables on stream, in some cases nuclear. The UK signed up to a nuclear alliance with other countries as well. All of these are necessary to power India's growth in a sustainable way.
Mm-hmm. How is the UK and India working together to deal with this crisis? I believe UK is co-chair of the CDRI as well. If you can elaborate as well.
Sure. I mean, it's one of the main planks of the 2030 roadmap we have between the UK and India, signed by the Prime Ministers now 18 months ago. And that's everything from research, for example, on green hydrogen, through to business investments. So, for example, Shell had bought a big renewables company here. Other companies are putting a lot more money into kind of renewables and sustainability. Through to joint programs on things like electric vehicles. I was in the Northeast last weekend talking to the chief ministers of Assam, Nagaland and Meghalaya, exactly about how we could do more sustainable transport in the future. So it's a combination of the government intervention, it's a combination of some funding as well, particularly into the research areas, and also just allowing very talented people to thrive. Also through other kinds of stimulus. So we just had one of the winners of Prince William's, the Prince of Wales's Earthshot Prize, and that's a fantastic company called S4S, Science for Society, an Indian company which has really innovative solutions about how you reduce food waste. So this covers almost every aspect of our work. And we do it also internationally. You're absolutely right to mention the CDRI. There's also the International Solar Alliance as well. The UK and India work together in other countries to try and help them, for example, to create more disaster-resilient infrastructure. India has fantastic experience in this. And to try to get more rollout of solar across the world as well. So India is going to be leading the way, not just in India, although that really matters, but also in other countries. And we're partnering together with them to try and make that work.
At the COP summit in Dubai, we saw the announcement by the Indian Prime Minister that India is pitching to host the COP summit in 2028. This is an announcement that has been greeted well by the international community. How do you see this announcement by the Indian Prime Minister that India will be hosting this mega climate summit, the COP 33 in 2028?
Well, it's an exciting announcement. Of course, it's for the process to deliver the outcome and for the final decision. But what I would observe is, firstly, India's global ambition, which was evident through the G20 presidency over the last year. Secondly, that ran a really good G20 presidency. In a way, broke the mold of how G20 presidencies will be done in the future. And India, I think, is one of those countries which is going to define our future. Can our planet be sustainable? So the ambition which Prime Minister Modi showed at Glasgow when he announced an enormous increase in renewables, the reduction in energy intensity. That is a message which you want to get out across the world. So I know it's very welcome that India has bid for that, and we'll see what comes out of it. But it's a very exciting thought.
So you just mentioned about how India and the UK are working together when it comes to dealing with the climate change. Are we looking at some third country, both countries working together for a third country initiative?
Yeah, we would like to do that. We do that in some areas, for example, on the disaster resilient infrastructure for small island states. So we have a creating facility around that. We'd like to see if we can get some of India's very effective frugal innovation working in some other countries across the world, because I think India has a lot to show the world. We saw it already in a way through the Covishield vaccine. There's a bit of British technology, Indian manufacturing might being projected into some of India's neighbours, for example, and that was originally British research and technology which got turned into something of benefit for the world. So that's a nice model to try and think how can you apply it elsewhere.
So now moving from climate to the bilateral aspect of the relationship, how do you characterize this relationship? We saw the visit of the Indian External Affairs Minister to your country, and he met the new Foreign Secretary as well on a very interesting day. So if you can talk about this relationship.
Sure, you're quite right. Minister Jaishankar met the Home Secretary James Cleverly in his last meeting as Foreign Secretary and his first meeting as Home Secretary, and was the first person from outside the UK who our new Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron met as well. So it was in the end a very auspicious timing. The UK-India partnership is a forward-looking one. It's very broad. Yeah? We're dealing with climate, we're dealing with the Living Bridge, increasingly on defence and security, trade and investment as well, including through the negotiations on the FTA, research and development, health, sustainability. And we have to look forward. We have the past that we have. That's had its consequences. One of the good consequences has been the extraordinary number of talented people from India and from the subcontinent who are now in the UK and thriving in the UK. And we have to keep looking forward. What are the challenges of tomorrow? How are we going to promote green investment, for example? How are we going to ensure that we have sustainable growth across the world? How are we going to keep the Indo-Pacific safe and secure? These are big, big challenges. the focus of the world is ever more going to move towards India and towards the Indo-Pacific. And that's of interest to us as well. And we want a free, sustainable, open Indo-Pacific. That's in India's interest and it's very much in ours.
The India-UK FTA talks are going. Any update you can give us? And will the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak travel to India? There are rumors going around that he's expected to travel in the month of January.
There are always rumors. Let's deal with the facts, which is we've had a high-level negotiating team here this week in Delhi exactly to see if we can crack the toughest nuts in relation to the FTA. This is hard, no doubt about it. What I saw this week was a shared will, and I have to give my respect to the Indian side, a really shared will from the top of the Indian government to see if we can make this happen. Now, there are some tough things which we have to get through, but I have to say there's a shared determination to try to do so.
And anything on the visit of the Prime Minister?
Let's deal with the FTA first, and the investment treaty.
And my last question to you, there are certain thorny issues as well. Every substantive relationship has that. And in this case, we have seen earlier this year Khalistani extremists indulging in acts of violence and vandalism. What do you have to say about these acts?
The first thing is that any form of extremism, and I'm not going to be sort of broad in its definition, is not something which we accept in the United Kingdom. And where there are expressions of extremism in the United Kingdom, that is a British problem, not just an Indian problem. That's a British problem because we cannot have acts of violence which break the law in our own country. How do you go about tackling that? At the sharp end, the police will have the powers to arrest people, and they will, and they did, and they have done in some cases in relation to Khalistani extremism. The regulators have powers, for example, when you have TV stations which are not really TV stations, you can stop them from broadcasting, as the regulator in the UK has, or when there are charities which are not really charities, the UK charities regulator has acted in that sphere as well. You have cooperation between the two governments to have a better understanding of what the problem is, because kind of by definition it's a cross-border issue to an extent as well. And finally, you have to do the prevent work. In other words, to make clear that this is not acceptable, and that the Sikh community in the United Kingdom, for example, is, lives and thrives and does very well. And what we don't want is any community disturbed by acts of extremism. So you need the cooperation, and you also need sometimes a firmer approach, and that's what we've taken, as well as, of course, making sure there's proper protection of the buildings and, most importantly, the people of the Indian High Commission. And that's why the police, it's a judgment for them, have increased their presence outside the High Commission in London exactly to achieve that effect, and where we're talking to the Indian government about longer-term measures to improve physical security as well.
But have you been able to assuage the concerns of the Indian side? Because in the past we have seen the Indian side very vocal publicly about these Khalistanis in UK.
Sure. That is for the Indian government to say rather than for me. What I think is we have a constant dialogue, and we recognise there are issues in the UK. That's why our security minister was out here in August actually announcing more money and effort into understanding the problem, being able to address it in the United Kingdom. So I hope that we can. There's so much good in what we need to do, and I've talked about many of those things, whether it's on the free trade agreement, whether it's on investments both ways, whether it's on sustainability, and we should not be diverted from our course of a very deep, broad, future-looking relationship.
Well, on that note, thank you very much for speaking to WION on a range of issues, whether it's climate or India-UK relationship. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for not mentioning.